But to think that in the capital of the United States, a paper owned by one of the wealthiest men in the world, who is busy on his $500 million yacht. I mean, it's grotesque, honestly. And of course, he's been asked to sell the paper and he refuses. So he seems to want to ruin it on purpose, as if it's a trophy for Donald Trump.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the Washington Post, since you worked there for 10 years, and it's just a tragedy that these layoffs have occurred, a third of the staff being laid off. First, tell us about the coverage we're losing, because I understand the entire Middle East, all the staff that covered the Middle East is gone. The woman who covered the Ukraine war is gone, but it's, I guess, now freelancing. Tell us what we're losing.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad that you asked about that, because I think it really is an important development. First of all, in a big picture sense, right? I think part of our crisis in our democracy is a crisis of our journalism. And if you look at a lot of states and cities around the country, they've already been experiencing what, unfortunately, now the Washington Post under Jeff Bezos is experiencing, which is, either going out of business entirely or, being gutted so that they're no longer able to provide that accountability reporting that is at the heart of a functioning government. And so I think that's part of what we've been seeing around the country already over the last 15 years that has, produced this kind of more nationalized politics and, more of a crisis and a different kind of people going into our politics. Here in Washington, well, it's not just, first of all, it's the sports section. And I can tell you a lot of, people, including my husband, are totally in mourning for that. But I think it's important things that strike both at the heart of us as local citizens and also nationally. You mentioned the foreign coverage being gutted. The foreign editor who actually quit in protest rather than carry out these cuts when he found out just how extensive they were going to be. He was our successor, actually, as the Moscow bureau chief of the Washington Post, a wonderful person with great integrity, a great journalist named Peter Finn. And we saw him recently after this, very unexpected end to his long career at the Washington Post. And, it seems to be almost punitive and done without any, rationale or sensibility, because the Post, at the same time they're firing the vast majority of their foreign correspondents, the editor of the Post, who came from Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal, was saying, well, we're going to have a strategy of doubling down on things like national politics and national security. Well, you can't cover national security and not cover the war in Ukraine, which is the deadliest conflict in Europe since World War II. So, it doesn't even make sense on the basis of their own stated excuse. And to the point about what we're losing, my husband and I are working right now on a book that is the history of Vladimir Putin and the 5 American presidents from Bill Clinton to Donald Trump who've dealt with him. I'll tell you, going back and researching the early years of Putin, because the Russian language press was, pretty compromised and owned by different oligarchs and not authoritative in the way that we're used to, if we didn't have that coverage from then of the New York Times, the Washington Post, basically the Financial Times, and the Guardian, that's the historical record of some very important events. And we are going to lose the historical record. It's not enough for a country the size and power of the United States to have only the New York Times covering the world. That's crazy. So that's first of all. As far as the Metro section, my husband spent the first, more than a decade of his career working for the Metro section of the Washington Post. Imagine the fact that in Washington, D.C. metro area is millions of people. We're not going to have any newspaper there. We're not going to have anybody in Richmond and in Annapolis holding the politicians' feet to the fire. We're not going to be covering, D.C. politics. We're not going to be covering, the millions and billions of dollars that are being spent in this area. When, the D.C. is having this terrible sewage spill in our Anacostia River right now. who's going to cover that in the future and tell us how it happened and why and what's being done with our taxpayer dollars? And I know this is a crisis that's hit so many other communities around the country already. But to think that in the capital of the United States, a paper owned by one of the wealthiest men in the world, who is busy on his $500 million yacht. I mean, it's grotesque, honestly. And of course, he's been asked to sell the paper and he refuses. So he seems to want to ruin it on purpose, as if it's a trophy for Donald Trump.
Do you think that's the reason that he's interested in currying favor with Donald Trump for his Blue Origin, for whatever else with...
I don't think it's a speculative thing. I think he is currying favor.
Yeah, but that's the reason.
Unfortunately. Yeah, sadly. And, I mean, look, Jeff Bezos's Amazon just paid $40 million, $28 million of which goes directly into the pocket of the First Lady of the United States or her self-promotional, quote unquote, documentary. I mean, there's a word for this. And if we were talking about another country, we wouldn't be hesitating to say what the word for this is. This is corruption. This is handing a $28 million bribe into the first family of the United States.
Join us next week when military historian and Washington Post columnist, yes, he's still with the Washington Post, Max Boot, will be in conversation with Larry Diamond about the future of Venezuela.